Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. Well, thanks for coming by, Liz.
Oh my gosh, so much tea.
More
Thank
tea than you know what to do with.
you.
Have you ever been interviewed before?
Um, like outside of a job,
Hmm.
I actually used to be the like interviewing manager for Hoffman Academy. Like I was in charge of the hiring process, and then I actually was like the mentor kind of to other people who are hiring. So I
Hmm.
definitely love to interview and be interviewed. I think the last thing I did was like more of a panel discussion at PSU, which
Hmm.
felt like, I don't know, I felt like the questions were so broad because I have such strong feelings about like the term classical music, and so did the two people I was chatting with.
Sure.
And I don't know, honestly, I don't think I said anything very intelligent. At least they got published. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I imagine with a panel, it's probably even harder because you're trying to juggle between the different
yeah,
people and yeah.
it was fun to hang out with them, but I also felt like too, both of these women had so much more experience than me. They're both like closer in age to like my mom, that I already felt like a little munchkin. Just
Yeah,
like,
kind
I
of
don't know.
intimidating. Sure.
Yeah, intimidating.
Well, in this case, hopefully this is more comfortable. Just you and me. We're about the same age.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, I think a good place to start, I was curious because we actually seem to have similar family situation in relation to music.
Mhm.
Neither of your parents are really musicians. I think your dad plays keyboard, right?
My dad actually has a master's degree in piano performance.
That's okay. All right. Well,
But
never mind.
yeah, I would say that like at this point, music is not like, I would say it's a staple in their lives. Like my dad's like volunteering all the time for like Portland Piano Company and like Chamber Music Northwest. Like they're such an interesting pair because they're kind of like that total opposite. Like he's so classical steeped, and my mom is like 70s funk. Like she's like the like cool like kind of like hippie, and he's like the nerdy classical pianist.
Sure.
So yeah, I would say all members of my immediate family have at some point, if not currently, make their money from music. My mom will defy that she is not a musician, but she has like an amazing voice. She harmonizes super well, and she did get paid to sing in a band when she lived in Mexico. But
All
that's
right.
she's the only one who's not musically trained. Everybody else, me, my sister, my dad, all have degrees in music. My dad and I both have masters.
Gotcha.
So
What
yeah.
was it like growing up with that kind of dichotomy in the house?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was always kind of like just surprising what my mom was into, because I think I've always been so nerdy. And part of that was like, whenever I would hang out with my dad, we'd like listen to the all classical station, and he'd be like, name that instrument. Like we'd play guessing games. Um, so I wasn't like a cool kid. Like I feel that I am more savvy and pop culture now, and part of that too was I was raised fairly conservative, so there was some music I just straight up didn't listen to,
Sure.
had like bad language or was suggestive or whatever. Um and yeah, I just feel like music was always such a part of my household that it didn't feel weird, or at least I didn't feel too weird. I think the fact that I would spend hours every day practicing piano.
Sure.
um, Probably my sweetest memory of like my family and music was the three of us singing. Like my dad maybe would be like helping sweep or like taking out trash, but we'd all do dishes and sing like sometimes 3-part harmony. Like
Mm.
that's one of my coolest memories, is like doing dishes and singing with my sister and my mom.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah, that's cool. Um, so I imagine they started you with lessons pretty early then.
Nope.
No? Okay.
No, that's the like weird thing, is that I think that I knew when I was like 5. I felt it in my soul. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be a pianist. I just knew it. I didn't
Hmm.
even know what that meant. But I did not. I think I did like a couple lessons with my dad, and it was very cute. But you know, if it's your child, you're not going to prioritize that. And he wasn't teaching piano at that point. He was doing his full-time work as a project manager, systems analyst, whatever he was doing at that point. And so I didn't start lessons until I was like 11, almost 12.
That's pretty late in the classical world. Yeah.
Incredibly late. Oh my gosh. Everyone I told in music school, like I've just always felt like a little bit of a, like that underdog. Like
Mm-hmm.
my piano studio, when I eventually got into my real piano studio, it was crazy how much harder I had to work because all the 5-year-olds were better than me. And so I was fighting against that and like trying to, yeah. So I feel like a lot of what inspired me was my stubbornness to like, no, I'm going to do this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I mean, I kind of have a similar experience because I started in junior high
Oh,
with cello.
oh,
Yeah, so
yeah.
I probably about the same age, but yeah, and then you get to college, and it's just like you realize that those first 10 years um, were all spent by everybody else
Yeah.
staying inside and playing music, basically.
I didn't know that about you actually.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, I was a late starter as well. As total, I mean, it's just like because there was a sort of required arts elective credit that you had to take, and I ended up in orchestra. So,
Hmm. Wow. Wait, did you not start with private lessons then?
I think I started taking private lessons probably about that halfway point between the first year.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, but I started with the school orchestra program.
Wow. Ah.
So cool. Well, we've got that in common. So if you're starting, who did you start lessons with at that age, and what was that experience like?
So besides the couple, I'm not going to count the couple of lessons with my dad. It
Hmm.
was just a handful, and I remember the cute little notebook. Yeah, I think that it was very much like um, I would say that of the two of my parents, my mom is more the go-getter. So she just like went out and found a piano teacher, and she was like a nice, sweet neighborhood piano teacher lady. She wasn't like great. She wasn't horrible, but I remember, I don't know if it's pretentious or just awareness of like what I knew I wanted. But in our first lesson, I remember her talking about like, oh yeah, and maybe someday you'll play Beethoven sonatas. I was like, of course I'm gonna play Beethoven sonata. I wanted to be like, lady, of course I'm gonna do that. Like that's, I felt very like not well placed with that studio. So that first 6 months to a year, I don't know what it was, very much not the appropriate fit for what I wanted. And then
Yeah.
my dad like called around to like some of his contacts from California from schools he'd gone to, and he found this like kind of otherworldly piano studio. And I'm still like friends with the people in that piano studio because it was such an immersive experience. Like,
Who was that?
oh yeah, so her name, oh, the first lady, I don't even want to say her name because I don't want to
Sure.
like, you know, I
That's
feel like
fair.
what I'm saying isn't super positive, and I also don't think she's a big deal in the musical world. She was just very casually teaching. My teacher growing up, my real teacher was Joanna Hodges,
Hmm.
and she was like an internationally known concert pianist who like toured Europe. I think she was one of the first women to tour Europe. She was like in the who's who of music. She at one point had an international piano competition in her name. She was like the Soviet Union when she went to go and play. She like played for people like I think Kavalevsky and maybe Khachaturian, like ridiculous
Hmm.
names that I'm like, but I've played these people. So she was a big deal, and that studio was like there was her, and then she had an associate teacher where you had to get to a certain level of proficiency before you could even take from her.
Hmm.
So it was like a
Interesting.
whole, dynasty. Not really,
Sure.
but yeah. So she had workshops every month that were required for you to attend. They were long. There was first the associate teacher's students and then hers. And you had to play from memory, didn't know when you were going. You just knew that it was going to go by era. And we did a concerto every year, no matter your age, at least one movement. We did, and you were required to go to a certain number of concerts outside of yours. We had recitals at the end of the year. Everyone did one. So for like maybe a month and a half, like this woman, how amazing is she? She opened up her home that she converted into like a performance space. Like she had a stage built, she had 2 concert grands put together. She had like a reception hall at the back that was added onto her house. We did like a talent show around Christmas, and the only requirement is it couldn't be piano. And we had an awards recital. I mean, she gave away cash prizes in the awards recital.
Huh.
And yeah, we were all required to do a 10-piece program every year, every era of classical music, Baroque, classical, romantic, and 20th century. And yeah, it was the same level of rigor that you would kind of expect from a college education.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much like music school.
Yeah, exactly.
During that, as an 11, 13-year-old, whatever, did you have any sense of how extraordinary that was? Or,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, even then it
it
was
was
pretty
like
obvious.
it was like hollowed ground to be there. Like you were literally, I mean, she had a very like Asian household. She's not Asian herself, but primarily the students were Asian. A few were Russian, but honestly, I was the minority not being
Hmm.
Asian. Especially in her studio, like there was a big divide between like her associate studio was still a lot of people who were of Asian descent, but it
Hmm.
was definitely in her studio, it was like a few white people,
Gotcha.
and
Huh.
that was it. Yeah, so you would walk in without your shoes, like you weren't allowed to wear shoes in the house. There would just be like 100 shoes outside of the front. Like there's a koi pond and a long driveway, and yeah, it was just like very, very magical. And I think I cried out of happiness when my parents told me that I had been promoted, because I was with her other associate teachers for probably 3 years actually.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I didn't get to be with her. They told me, I think we got in the car and they were like, they had like smirks on their faces, but they were like, so Lizzie, you're not going to be doing hour lessons anymore. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, you're going to be doing half-hour lessons. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, with Joanna. And I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I think my dad may have asked, which, yeah, okay. Yeah, but she was just like, yeah, she was like this like celebrity. That's what it felt like in the beginning, and then it became actually really cool. Sorry, I'm like thinking about her now.
Hmm.
She passed away a couple of years ago, and I was at the like celebration of her life, and yeah, it was super weird. Like I have some like things from her, but like I got to teach some of her students when she was in the hospital and not doing well. And even like after college, when I was a year between undergrad and grad school, I took lessons from her, and we had like such a sweet friendship. Like there was no like fearful like respect, like oh my gosh. It was just like we were talking like people, and she had also actually converted to Christianity. So we had this whole other like side to our relationship where I'm like, oh wow, this is something I can like talk about with you. Like that's
Hmm.
interesting. And she maybe took it in a slightly different direction, like it was a little more intense. But
Sure. I mean, she sounds like just an intense person in general.
yes,
Yeah.
she was just straight up learning Russian like in the last year or two of her life because she was
Hmm.
going to a Russian church. Like she had a
Okay. Yeah.
translating the sermon. Yeah,
I mean, cool.
yeah,
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 that's some dedication.
yeah.
Um, what were some what were some of the biggest things that have carried over from your lessons then to now?
I mean, the biggest thing is that in my piano studio, the only like picture I have outside of a few pictures of me and students that my boss got me when I left Hoffman Academy was is a picture of me and her, because she's my greatest inspiration. She was my original teacher. I loved my other 2 teachers. One of them honestly feels like a peer to me because she's maybe 10 years older than me, but she lives around the corner in Southeast Portland.
Hmm.
Amazing pianist. Um, but yeah, I feel like with Joanna, there was so much about the way that she had presence and commanded respect, even though she was like there was a lot about her that was kind of frail, but she like held herself so well, and she was always interested in doing the best she possibly could, being okay with uncomfortable emotions. Like I remember crying in a lesson, and she was kind of like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, cry. That's good."
Natural. Hmm.
Um, and the fact that she was wanting to grow as a person and wanting to learn about everything, and she wasn't just obsessed with piano. I mean, she was, but yeah, just so much of my education as a pianist comes from her. So she's my little like I'll look at that picture of me and her, uh, and that inspires a lot of my teaching.
Cool. I know from working with you that you have a deep interest in performing new music,
Mhm.
and I actually did a little bit of googling around for Joanna Hodges, and it sounds like from, I mean, you said she had a 20th century uh, literature requirement
Yes.
for her students, and I found like an old New York Times review where she was playing a new work by Havanis.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, one of his piano sonatas, I think. Um, and I was wondering if um, that interest in playing new music came from her, or if that was something that was already kind of there and she just nurtured it.
it honestly was probably nurtured by her, and then it got really exciting and real when I went to college, because I got to premiere a work of my friend who was like a composer, and that was just so crazy to me that I'm like, you wrote this, no one's ever played it, no one's ever heard it. Like that was, like an honor. But Joanna, man, she had weird scores that she would like bust out, and she was actually, as a kid, she had like a breakdown and stood up for herself at like some crazy age, like 7. Like she told her parents, like, I can't be a jazz pianist and a classical pianist, I have to pick one. She was like performing on the radio and all kinds of crazy things. I remember her saying that her Carnegie Hall debut, her encore, she improvised her encore, and the reporter said, oh, it was some obscure Kabalevsky or Prokofiev or something.
Sure.
They did not do a good job reporting that she straight up improvised her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was really passionate about, even though she was really, there was a lot that was old school about her. A lot of people hate hearing this, but she loved Brahms, and it was like an honor to play Brahms, and she hated Debussy and thought it was trash, to the point that she say, Sasha, my dog, could play Debussy. And like no one would play Debussy. So she had like very strong and some old school opinions, but she
Yeah.
also would play weird stuff. And she had a composer friend who wrote a little concertino, because everyone was required to play one. And I still have that score, and it's just like handwritten, and it's very fun. So I think there was probably some like, oh, this is normal and you should be doing this from her. But yeah, I still remember the first piece I played, the Washington Elm Scion, the Scion of the Washington Elm, was a piano solo by my friend Michelle.
Was that at University of Washington?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and
So
it was weird.
let me try and get the geography straight.
Yeah.
So as a kid, you grew up where?
So I was born in San Francisco. We moved
Okay.
to Vancouver, Washington when I was 3, and that's where I grew up in her studio. And I went to Clark College when I was 16 and did Running Start. I got an associate's degree, and then I went up to University of Washington when I was like 19.
Gotcha.
And then
And you didn't just do music though. I noticed you have a minor in dance.
yes, that was like I felt cool in the dance world as a musician, and I felt cool in the musician world as a dancer. Um, so yeah, at that point, because I had a degree already, I had almost no like non-major classes, which was really nice.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, so my main focus, I mean, all of my classes were like music. I think I took like maybe a year of French and like a philosophy class, and otherwise it was just dance and music. Yeah.
So you were doing dance in addition to an intense piano studio experience with an internationally renowned
Yes,
pianist.
Yes, not as intensely. And there was a
Mm.
point where I feel like ballet got kind of replaced with piano because some part of me wanted to be a ballerina. And I was like, well, my feet and my hips are saying piano.
Yeah. All right,
um,
that's fair.
yeah, but oh man, I love ballet. I did ballet for kind of a surprising amount of time for the fact that I don't feel like I look like a ballerina. I'm not
Mm.
like slender. I'm not like a tiny little ballerina. Um, but yeah, I loved dance. I've never stopped loving it. And I was less involved, but my family was actually really involved in a theater group growing up, and that was a huge part of my life. But I was like the nerd who's like, no, I'm not going to hang out. I need to go practice piano. Like I was like the not cool one. Yeah, yeah. My youth
I
was
understand.
filled with like so much. Like I grew up playing soccer. I grew up like being very involved in a church group called Awana. Like I did a lot growing up. It doesn't surprise me that that has spilled over into my adult life, that I fill my time with activities.
I've done a good amount of work with dancers at Southern Methodist University. They
Mm-hmm.
have a really strong dance program there, and just working with them, they definitely have a different sense of how music is.
Mm-hmm.
I think, for lack of a better way of putting it, because I'm not a dancer, but working with them, I could definitely tell they were coming at it from a different place. How has that dance experience inform your playing or understanding of music just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it impacts me more is that I thought that was what I was going to write my master's thesis on,
Hmm.
was dance and music. And I actually did a pretty like bold Liz kind of move where I went to in the dance department at UW, which is amazing. And I know SMU is really great, and U of O, that was one place I actually applied and got in for my undergrad and my master's. And I'm like, maybe I'll go for my doctorate, like third time's the charm.
Sure.
And yeah, it was always kind of my desire to be like around dancers or maybe still dancing. Um, so we had live dance accompaniment for all of our dance classes, ballet, modern, didn't matter. It was so cool. So the head of that, the music of the dance department, I like went to him and was like, hey, can I just like shadow you and get credit for it and just like create a credit? And he was like, yeah, but you can't play from notated music, you have to improvise. And that was like, at the time, right now, like improvising, that sounds great. At that time, little Liz, who had almost no experience with anything, and I was still a very like insecure pianist because everyone had like 10 years on me, it felt like.
Yeah.
That was scary, but very fun. So I would say the biggest way dance impacted me as a pianist was that started to open up my world in terms of improvising.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How about music in general? Like when you're playing or just looking at a score, is movement more part of your conceptualization of music, or is
I
it still mostly like sound oriented?
I definitely like to move with music. I definitely will find myself like moving my arms a lot, especially in like,
Mm.
graceful ways. But what are the ways in which it impacts me? They've just always been so tied. I
Yeah,
always feel like
hard to.
dance, music, like they, go together. And sometimes I do, all of my students actually, there's a little piece by Gurlitt called Dance, and it's like, ba-da-da-da-da, and the left hand's like, boom, 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 boom,
Mm.
boom.
Yeah.
So kind of no matter what, I teach every student when they learn that piece a waltz step. So they
Mm,
feel
okay.
the heavy stress of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there are little things like that, but I'm not nerdy enough to go through and all the like jig and courante and sarabande. I don't know
Hmm.
those dances in like box suites because I'm like,
Right.
I'm not interested. Um, I would say that's maybe the main way that it impacts me, but um, yeah, I'm more visual than I am even auditory
Gotcha.
with
Yeah.
music. um,
It's fair.
yeah.
No, I get that because like uh, when I compose, part of how I know I'm done, like there's a way a score looks, like a
Mm,
finished score just looks like it's done. Um, So I understand that that side very much,
Well,
especially because like in instrumental music, it's mostly like if you have an orchestra program or whatever, you're learning notation, right?
yeah.
I mean, that's just how you learn music. So um, I'm trying to remember. So you went to University of Washington,
Hmm.
and then you went to Baylor.
Yeah.
And after having been on the West Coast for your entire life, I've been to Baylor. I can only imagine that was a culture shock.
Oh my gosh. Like I did a study abroad in my undergrad and went to Paris for a month and like traveled a little bit in Europe. I was the first person in my family off the continent. So that was really cool for me. I was way more culture shocked going to Texas.
Yeah,
Way,
I can see that.
especially because everyone's like, well, yeah, it's America, and like, yeah, it's all the same. And in the master's program, I feel like a third of the people were not from Texas, a third were, and the other third, instead of like being around, I was used to being a minority, like not being Asian in a music school. I was like, where are all the Asian people in this school? Like, there were almost none. A lot more people were from Latin America because that made sense, like geographically.
Yeah.
Uh, so, you know, my friends were now all from like Venezuela and Colombia and Costa Rica. And um, so I would say the weirdest thing was when people would tell people from other countries, my friends would tell me, oh, America's like do, 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 like these things. And I'm like, no, it is not. That is Texas. That I have lived in America my whole life. That's not what it's like where I come from.
Do you have any specific examples you're comfortable sharing or?
Um, I think the main thing that stood out to me was something that I kind of expected, maybe two things. So the fact that I put on makeup, that's just me, you know, wanting to like look good over Zoom. But
Sure.
I went into like living in Texas with the idea that I don't want to change who I am. I'm a bit of a hippie. I just kind of want to defy like fitting in because I want to be myself. I want to be like uh and I was okay with people kind of like playing up. I almost feel like I played up like, oh yeah, I'm so like granola. I'm so like what a crunchy hippie I am. Even though I'm like back home, people think I'm like, you know, I'm not a hippie. um, so that was one thing is that I didn't want to start wearing more makeup. At
Hmm.
that point, I still wore mascara, maybe lip gloss, um, and I didn't want to up that. The other thing was that I feel like sometimes the Northwest can be a little bit passive aggressive culturally, but also, especially in Portland, there is this sense that we kind of love this customer service that's not fake sweet. I'm putting on this face for you of happiness, but like if someone's having a crummy day, you might kind of feel it from them, or they might not try to hide it at all. They're just like, ugh, life sucks, and like, here's your coffee, like, bye. And I kind of like that because it's so honest and so
Yeah.
I really value directness. And it felt a little crummy that I would have people sometimes treat me in a certain way publicly, but find out like, oh, that person's like talking smack about me behind my back. Not that I
Hmm.
don't think that happens here. I'm sure people talk about each other behind their backs all the time, but there's not a facade of saccharine, ultra like, oh, aren't you great? Like there was just a bit of that. And I don't know, because I know a lot of people from Texas at this point. Um, I think it may have been specific to the culture that I was in Waco and Baylor.
Yeah.
And this wasn't everybody. Like
Hmm.
I met a lot of people that I'm still friends with and love. I'm trying not to like diss Texas. I'm not saying it's Texas, but some of that culture of ultra sweet to disguise things you don't like was not pleasant to me. I'm like, just yeah, I'm like, be mad at me if you're mad at me. I don't want to question like, well, who actually likes me? So
Sure.
is that
Uh,
is that like your experience at all from Texas to here?
I
Or was
mean,
your culture shock?
it's a little bit odd for me because I grew up in Houston. Well, let me qualify that. I grew up in Katy, which is
Oh,
technically part of the greater Houston area, but is its own place. But my parents are very cosmopolitan people, and Katy is like one of the whitest places on earth, I think. Um, so growing up there, there was always a sense of not quite fitting. But Houston itself, I mean, it's an oil town. So people from all over the world are coming in. And I know a number of people are like, "You're from Texas? You don't have an accent." I'm like, "No, I'm from Houston. And that's why I don't have an accent, because it all kind of uh, blends." Um, so I think actually coming from Houston to here wasn't as big of a culture shift in a lot of ways. At least downtown Houston has
Mhm.
a lot of just a lot of everything. It's a lot more of a mix than maybe people realize. But Dallas is definitely a different world.
Yes.
Um, and especially going to SMU, like, which is just plopped right in the richest part of the city. Um, and not realizing how big of a bubble that was until remembering, like, oh right, walking around Waco is not a great idea. And depending on, what time of day it is.
Hmm.
um, and having that very it's very fashion centric and very material centric, I
Yeah.
think. um, and then coming to Portland, which is fashion centric in kind of a different way.
Yeah.
um, yeah, Dallas to Portland would have been pretty seismic, I think.
Yeah.
But Houston to Portland, not as much. So, um, and you got your master's in both pedagogy and performance. Was that like a combined degree, or like, okay?
Yeah, it was. I was very specifically looking for programs where I wasn't gonna like cease being a pianist,
Right.
because that's still, I don't want to say it's a fear. It's just something I always want to be aware of. I never want to be someone who's only teaching, because I know for me, I am less inspired by people who aren't still doing their craft that they're teaching. Um, and I'm not as inspired. It's been difficult during this quarantine, and I've realized it,
Mm,
that me not performing is impacting my teaching. Like, I'll even have moments of jealousy of like,
mm.
I want to be playing the piano right now. You get to play the piano. Oh,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I took a long time, and I looked at, I think, every pedagogy program in the world. And SMU was actually one of the top, it probably was in my top 10 or something. And I like narrowed it down, and I ended up applying to U of O because I was very interested. And I applied to TCU and Baylor. And it was very nice that like I got into all of them, but that didn't matter to me. I didn't feel like it was worth it to go into debt. So
Mm,
Baylor was the choice for me for sure. But it was funny because I actually spent a lot of time at TCU. They like took us out to lunch and
yeah.
went to a recital of someone's. But I realized once I got there, because they have the oh I'm embarrassed for blanking on it. It's a huge international piano competition. Oh, what is his name? Van Cliburn. There we
Thank.
go. Oh my gosh, take out all my pauses. Oh yes, competition.
I promise she is a pianist.
Yes, don't worry. But because of that, there were so many people there for an artist diploma that I was only guaranteed as a pedagogy major. It was something ridiculous, like 2 or 3 hours a day was I guaranteed that I would have a practice room.
Oh,
And it
yeah,
would
that,
be
okay.
assigned to me. It wasn't like I got to choose. It would just be like, oh, these are your hours to practice. I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. That is not the way I roll. Um, so I was like, huh. I think that they're more trying to like bring up piano teachers than like pianists who teach, and that's
Right.
at TCU.
I gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. So I spent very little time at Baylor, and I just like I knew that that was probably where I was going to go. My pedagogy advisor has actually just come out with a book called Yoga in the Music Studio. Like, she was a yoga instructor. I was like a model in her first book that had a chapter about yoga. So it was clearly the right place for me.
Cool. Yeah, I was actually gonna ask about that because you do a lot of yoga lessons here in Portland. And I mean, that's dance adjacent.
Yes.
But I also kind of get the sense that musician overall wellness is super important and that yoga is like an expression of that.
Yeah.
When did that start becoming like its own concrete thing
Yeah.
of like joining wellness with musicianship?
Yeah, that's actually a really cool like history in my own life to think about looking back on it. My first class I took, my first yoga class was at a community college when I was like 16. And this lady, she was an odd duck. And I loved her though. Even looking back on it, she was doing all these really cool things with approaching yoga more holistically. Like she started one class, she just had like a peach and she said nothing. We just all like came in, we're sitting in like a gym and she just like starts eating it like just crazy, like slobbering, like stuff is falling down her face. And she was like, this is how you should treat life. Like just enjoy it. Like that was something that was like her message, or that's my takeaway from her message. So I like took a yoga class, but then I took in at UW when I was in the dance department, I took vinyasa for dancers, and vinyasa is to flow, and that's the kind of yoga that I'm certified in and teach. And oh, it was so beautiful to watch this. One of my dance instructors, I'll totally name drop, Catherine Cabine. She's like one of the most beautiful dancers I've ever seen. I was so lucky to get to study with her, and she was very gracious in the way that she presented yoga because I knew that she and I probably philosophically disagreed about a lot of things, but she created such an open, kind space for everyone to approach yoga with whatever they believed. So that was kind of my like, oh yeah, I'm into yoga, and I would try other studios, and I tried like hot yoga. And then I really did go to Baylor with the thought that, oh, my thesis is going to be about movement and music, probably ballet. And then I started seeing more and more of my students who were non-piano majors, but some of them were music majors, some of them were outside the music school, but they were playing at pretty high levels. And I was shocked at how much like tension was in the shoulders and the elbows, just everything held to the point that I'm like, I can't even deal with this if everything else is tight. So I would like take them away from the piano, do some like light stretches, yoga. So it was kind of becoming more and more apparent to me that we needed to rework some of the larger muscles first.
Mm-hmm.
So midway through my master's, when I came home to Portland for the summer, I got certified to be a yoga instructor. And I knew that I had the power to do whatever I wanted with my private students at Baylor. So my advisor, Leslie McAllister, was like, anything you put in your syllabus, your students have to do. Like, you totally have power to do whatever you want, whatever you think will benefit them. And I was like, I'm going to require them all to take some kind of yoga or awareness class. And it doesn't have to be mine, but I started offering free yoga classes, and I made them reflect on how it changed or didn't change. And that's included in my thesis, some of their reflections. And for some of them, it was really helpful. I hope for all of them.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot to be said for the way that our bodies and minds, and even just like our sense of like who we are in the world and the universe, like our spirituality, our religious beliefs, how that impacts us as people and how that impacts our music. As music creators or even as music appreciators. I don't know anyone who hasn't had like a spiritual experience listening to music. I don't know those people. Like even if you're not a musician, I feel like everyone at some point has been like, and there was this amazing piece of music and I just like, like, so that's I think what I'm always trying to work more towards is like thinking about how does this impact our mind, our bodies, how does our, even just our beliefs around where our mind is when we're practicing. Like
Yeah.
I'm very curious about like neuroscience as well. Like if I were to go back and get a degree, it would probably be in, oh, well, it could be anything. There are a lot of things that interest me, but yeah.
Cool. Trying trying to think. One of the other things that has come up a number of times playing with you and performing it with you has been your dedication to bringing, especially women composers, into performance and into concert halls. Um, and I don't know. I feel like that you and I like started college around a time when women in music, well, classical music, just started to thaw. Like it feels really weird saying that because you think, well, I mean, music's been around a long time, but um, do you feel like that's an accurate assessment on my part?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I think too, the fact that outside of one teacher I had for a few months, all of my teachers growing up, all of them have been women. Yeah. Um, and I was thinking about it because I knew you were going to ask me about being a woman in the classical music world. And some part of me was like, I don't have any like horrible negative stories, but it's like, I know all the implicit things, even like a sweet older maestro who's like commenting on my appearance in a kind of a skeezy way, or reading about somebody who makes a comment about, well, of course a conductor can't be a woman because that's distracting. And yeah, I don't feel like I personally, I really was trying to think through, I'm like, have I ever been affected? I know there have been like micro things that I could point to, but I feel like like you're saying, I'm very lucky in that I grew up in a time where I didn't feel that directly. Like
It's
to stand
yeah.
up for myself as a woman in the classical musical world.
Okay. Um, I know that, being in Portland, it might seem like a sort of stereotypical thing, though. Like, oh, yeah, so feminism in music, of course, in Portland.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've done work. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her last name. Becca, the singer,
The Stool
who,
Bar, yes.
yeah, who is very much like that seems to be like her primary
Hmm.
angle
Yeah.
is representation of women in music. What has it been like working with her? I know you've become very close friends too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say we kind of had this immediate connection and kind of like a how did we not know each other, because she does vocal yoga and I do yoga for musicians. And yeah, so the house show she did recently was Homemaking for Feminists, or Feminist Homemaking, something like that was the title.
Yeah,
It's very cute, and I loved and cute in that it was playing up this sweetness. It was nothing negative about homemaking. Like they all wore aprons at some point during the show. And they had, I was playing on one of Becca's songs, and then we had another pianist who was a woman, so everyone performing was a woman. Um, but I think too, she's also very much in the queer world, so not only uplifting female composers, but queer composers.
hmm.
So what was cool was the way that there was an interplay of some male composers with female themes, and then a lot of female composers, and getting to hear a little bit of the history of their lives and like the things that they encountered. I think it's the same way we're feeling right now really strongly, the need to historically know about what has happened to people who are Black in America. It feels like a similar thing with Becca's uh, vision, at least from my perspective, that there's going to be a little storytelling and a little bit of like, hey, here's what was happening in this woman's life when she was writing this piece. And here's, the history of, you know, my mom grew up in San Francisco, my actual mom. And she's my mom, like that's one generation. And she was living in a liberal place, going to public school. And when she was growing up, she couldn't wear pants to school as a girl. Like that feels like, I don't know, something out of a movie that's not real.
Right.
So I think it's more knowledge and in some ways just appreciation of like the fact that you were so good about finding female composers for us to play. I was like, oh, Amy Beach. Yeah, I don't know this woman. Like, I love this woman. She's great.
Mhm.
I love that some of the people I work with at PSU who are like my colleagues are, I mean, revolutionaries in Portland and probably on a much bigger scale as female composers. Crazy Jane. I feel like there are just so many options of seeing women-led, Black-led, queer-led music in Portland. So yeah, I don't know. Some part of me just feels like, oh, I'm a woman. Like I want to make sure I'm representing in at least every program I do. Hopefully, have a female composer, even if it's just like it's me.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it can be, that's something that I've been bumping up against, like the historical representation is hard to puncture, right? Because like first you have to find them, which can be a little bit tricky if they're not like Amy Beach.
Yeah.
And then once you have found them, that doesn't necessarily mean that their scores are readily available. I think that's been the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
Is like finding a name and going, this person actually seems pretty interesting, and then like, where is their music? It's nowhere. I mean, obviously it must be somewhere, but it's not like in the public record in the way like Bach is.
Yeah.
So still a lot of work to do on that front.
I read, I don't know if it was all classical or maybe a like more national organization put together a list of like 10 Black composers you should know. And I listened to some and I was like, ooh, this piece is really cool. I'm interested in this. And then I went and I'm like, where do I find the music though? And
Right.
that feels like a bummer because it feels like I'm so glad they wrote that, but it also feels like, okay, so the work is half done then. Like exposure, but no like possibility for the experience.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you brought that up because I've, you know, yeah, there's all kinds of things to think about. There's all kinds of layers when it comes to people who are underrepresented in certain
Right.
yeah, fields.
And I guess we're coming up on an hour, so we should probably wrap this up. But you've started composing recently for the first time. You have like 2 or 3 compositions?
I have so right now, as we speak,
Yeah.
my music videos of my compositions are being edited by my filmmaker housemate and very dear friend. I actually have, I would have to actually count. I think we did 9 or 10
Okay.
recordings of my originals. I do have a couple more originals, like primarily for students. Like one is about finger numbers, the finger number song. One is like Ode to the Tritone. One is like Snowy Day Blues. They're all shorter pieces.
Gotcha.
But yeah, this is, I realized when I started compiling things that I'm like, oh, I've actually been composing my whole life, but very like, just kind of like a little thing here, a little thing there. But some of my compositions go back almost 12 years.
Mm.
Like one here, one there. But I'm actually gonna launch a Kickstarter in the next couple of days to start selling like these books of them, because I also do arrangements for my own students of classical pieces, you know, some that are written not for piano or some that are written for way too hard of a piano part for a student to do. And that's become a really fun thing and a really like deep dive during quarantine, because as I've been recording and kind of editing down the compositions that are kind of done and recorded, I have been kind of frantically like on this mission to like, oh, I'm like, oh, I have this other idea over here and this other thing. So I would say I already have multiple pieces close to done, and I'm already like planning for the next time that I record them, which is, you know, scary and intimidating, especially to speak to a composer who like this is your, I don't want to say this is your life, because your life has many different parts, but I think of you so much as a composer.
I wouldn't feel too bad about that. I didn't actually complete an actual composition until a couple years after graduating from college.
Oh,
I think I had like one composition that I wrote in college, and I did take like a semester's worth of composition lessons from Dr. Kevin Hanlon.
oh,
Um, but yeah, I was there for cello,
okay.
and I knew that I wanted to compose, but fitting that into my life and figuring out how to do it was
Yeah.
kind of tricky.
How do
So
you do it now? Like, what is your balance of like you teach, which is,
uh,
I feel like I don't know if it's more or less exhausting for you depending on your workload, but when I do in-person piano lessons, I'm not super exhausted as like an extrovert. I still feel like I have a lot of like, I almost have more energy sometimes when I get done teaching.
sure.
So what is your balance like?
Uh, Most of my time right now is pretty free because school just ended. So
Yes, me too.
my cello classes are over.
Cool.
Um, but during the school year, I'd say it's probably like 70% teaching, maybe like, and then maybe like 15% practicing, and then the rest composing.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
and I just am lucky that I have the teaching there because I don't like my composition brain isn't always on.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I could actually be like just a composer and force myself to keep writing stuff that I didn't want to write when I'm not wanting to write. You
Yeah, exactly.
know? So that's a whole conversation I could have about like how I imagine all these different facets of music intersecting for myself. But
Can I interview you? Can we like flip this around at some point? I'll
sure,
interview you because I have
sure,
a lot
if
of
you'd
like,
like to.
oh yeah, of course I do. I have a lot of like composer questions, especially now, and I am trying to talk to all my friends who are composers. I'm considering taking lessons in composition. Do you know Stephen Lewis?
Oh yes, yeah, right.
We met up and chatted, and I was like, hey, I'm potentially interested in learning from you. And then I just straight up have a friend. I don't know if you know Nicholas Emerson.
No,
He
no.
just had his piano trio premiered at Fear No Music, and it was like his therapy going through PTSD in the military.
Okay, yeah.
So we're doing a trade for his feedback from me teaching his son piano. And by the way, I met him as like he was my student,
Yeah.
my
um,
my yoga student.
oh, okay, I see. Yeah, these worlds are colliding.
Yeah, really weird worlds, but yeah, but I've wanted to talk to you about composing. So I knew we'd chat today, but I was like,
Sure.
yeah, composing. And I'm just so grateful. I just want this to be part of the interview. I'm so grateful that you and I have worked. You're my most like, I don't want to say most beloved because I'm sure a lot of people are loved in my house show series, but like you're the most beloved. Like my mom always talks about how amazing you are,
Aw.
how talented you are. And I just can't believe how much mutual like respect and pouring out of effort I feel like there is in each of us for each other. The fact that you wrote suites for each season for my house show series just is like the biggest honor. Like that first composition I ever got to play. It was like this huge honor that my friend wanted me to play her piano solo. It's a huge honor that you did this to like support and love me.
Oh, awesome. I mean, uh, it was a pleasure, and I felt like it was something. I mean, like those house concerts were among the first concerts that I played here, so it felt like, oh, I should write something for us, kind of in honor of that. Um, so I'm glad to hear that things have meshed well.
Yeah, it was like a gift. That's what it sounds like it was intended to be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll wrap this up then. Any questions you wished I asked for another interview sometime?
But, you asked great questions. I love that you did any reading about me. That's the funniest part. I mean, as someone who's done a lot of interviews, it's hilarious to me when I would have someone come in for an interview. They hadn't even been to our website. Like we had a full website, and I figured there were things you knew about me and things you probably didn't know about me, because I don't tend to talk about my background in a lot of detail with
Yeah,
people. Because I'm too busy talking. Like I just want to like talk with people. I'm like, enough about me. Um, so yeah, thanks for giving me the chance to just chatter away about my life.
of course. Yeah, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Cool.
All right.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what this is going to be like.
Yeah, me too. All right, I'll stop that recording.